Hi, it's Mike here. I wanted to talk a little bit about a question that I was chatting to Kent about a few weeks ago. And when we think about Logic App Agent Loop, there's a question about inside the agent loop itself, what data actually gets returned back to the LLM. And the reason I think that's important to understand is because obviously um, the Azure OpenAI service is all based around number of tokens. So the more text that's involved in the interaction between your Logic app and the OpenAI service, the more tokens you're going to utilize effectively. So I want to just talk a little bit about what that kind of looks like and how Kent explained how this works to me. So I'm going to drop over into my Logic app here, and we've basically got a standard Logic app with an HTTP request there, and then here we're going to call into the agent, and we're going to provide the system prompt, the user prompt, and the agent's going to basically wait for the model to call back to execute one of my tools. So let's imagine, for argument's sake, I've got an order I'm processing. The system prompt may tell me a bit about how to process an order, and then the user prompt will probably give me details of the order. Then the LLM is going to be aware of tools that I've registered, which are these down here. So we've got two tools registered where we'd give it a description of the tool and we give it some information about what the tool may provide back to the Logic app. So the idea being, if I just kind of draw this out a little bit, um, so let's imagine we've got our LLM out on Azure OpenAI. So the agent basically calls out here, and the model's going to stop working through the processing of the order, and then it's going to call back over and execute this tool when it decides it's going to need it. And it may provide something like an order ID back to the tool. So in this case here, the tool's going to execute all of these steps. And my question was, well, if I think about this Logic app, so let me just go slightly further down a minute. So you'll see down here at the end of the tool, there's no explicit point where we call back to the agent, back to the model to say, look, here's the data you're going to get. So that was my question about what actually gets returned back. So the way Kent described this to me, I think is quite a good way Microsoft have done it. So basically, these steps here will execute, and then within the tool, whatever's the last step, the output data from that step is what would go back to the model to then give the model the response from your tool, which it would then process. That kind of makes sense, although in the tool itself it's not explicit that there is a response action. So Kent was saying that they expect most customers will probably have a compose shape, a bit like what I've got down here, where you're going to craft some kind of message, whether it be a text message, a JSON message, or similar, that you would return back to the model. So I think that's really easy to implement, and it's just a case of knowing what that means. Now, I think the good thing is here, because we're only returning what's in that last shape, the all the data, because this HTTP action could have a huge response. We only want a tiny part of it, so it would be a good practice here to just parse out the bit you need out of the API response, and then either, in this case, if you think of the parse JSON shape, so although I've created a schema for that big JSON document, even on the parse JSON, the output still really includes the entire message. So really what I want to do in the compose shape will be craft a much simpler JSON, just using the properties that I need, and then return that. And that would be a really good way of limiting the amount of data going back to the model, which is going to translate into giving me a better cost for running this particular agent. Now, one of the things that I think is going to be quite interesting here is, if you think about this particular tool here, I've got quite a lot of shapes in it, and it's going to be a little bit tricky for me to kind of manage this as it scales out. So I think if we think about the fact that the final shape's really what responds back to the model, that it's probably quite a good idea to use a pattern a bit like this, where we'd actually call a child workflow. That would then be the thing that returns to the model. So the benefit of the child workflow is I can encapsulate the logic of the tool, and effectively I can have a bunch of workflows that are really just tools that would be used by my agent. Now, there's a couple of benefits of this. Number one, it's encapsulated so that the agent workflow is going to be much simpler. It's going to be more composed into building blocks, so it'll be much easier to maintain and change over time. And also, it'll be more testable because I'll be able to test these tools to make sure they're right without having to without having to worry about all the complexity of making the agent test the right things. So I think there's a lot of benefits in this pattern, but the key point here is in these two cases, it's the output from the compose or the output from the workflow. If these tools both got executed, that would be the data that returned back to the model. So I've had a really interesting discussion with Kent about that, and I thought it would be quite useful for people to be aware of that if you weren't already aware. So hopefully this was a useful short video. Thank you for listening. Have a great week.